So yeah, SEEDS had commissioned us to think about bird-friendly coffee on campus. And so for our project, we focused on coffee shops. So we're going to start by giving you some background on bird habitat, coffee plantations, certifications, and then discuss the interviews that we conducted, our analysis, and some of the recommendations that we have for SEEDS moving forward. So to give you some background, birds are obviously some of the most charismatic and important animals in our backyards and our forests, but their populations have been suffering over the past 50 years. Since 1970, nearly 3 billion birds have disappeared, resulting in a 25% reduction in just half a century. These losses have been caused primarily by anthropogenic drivers, including deforestation, contaminants, climate change, invasive species, and even outdoor cats. As key pollinators, seeds dispersers, prey, and predators in our ecosystem, the loss of bird populations will have unimaginable environmental, economic, and social consequences, and it's already begun. While new laws and protections aim to reduce these effects and recover species at risk in North America, these laws cannot follow birds on their southerly migration to Latin America. But winter's not the only threat that they're contending with. And over the past century, South America has seen enormous deforestation for the sake of agriculture, and it's estimated that less than 10% remains of the mid-elevation montane forests that many of these migratory bird species rely on. So at this elevation, much of the original habitat has been converted into coffee plantations. However, bird and agriculture are not necessarily at odds with one another. Depending on the management style of the coffee plantation, farmed land may be able to support a variety of birds. Farmers can choose between a range from rustic production, which includes having coffee bushes make up the understory and are shaded by a healthy canopy of tall trees, which you can see in the first photo, and then to intensive monocultures of coffee bushes that are grown in direct sunlight, which is called sun-grown, and that's the second photo. Shade-grown coffee farms are some of the only remaining forested areas in mid-elevation ranges in South America, and therefore are one of the last reserves for migratory birds. Shade coffee plantations offer great conservation potential, as there's a lot of evidence that shows that many species prefer this modified habitat over other agriculture and land management options, and some species have even proved to be equally successful in these canopies as they are in naturally forested areas. Additionally, agricultural land management practices that support greater biodiversity also benefit from better soil fertility. They receive biopest control from the resident birds, attract more pollinators, all of which goes to increase the quality and better the taste of shade-grown coffee. However, understandably, many of these farmers sacrifice these varied benefits in exchange for the more intensive sun-grown coffee fields, as they tend to have better yields in the short term. While North American citizens have no influence on the politics of Latin America, the Smithsonian stepped in and created the bird-friendly certification, which I might refer to as BFC from here on in 1997, in an effort to make use of market mechanisms to allow coffee drinkers the opportunity to support and preserve bird habitat by choosing sustainable coffee. The bird-friendly coffee certification specifically targets migratory birds' needs and requires certified plantations to uphold specific standards such as minimum canopy height and cover and a variety of different tree species. Additionally, the bird-friendly certification is already free trade and organic, and it upholds a rigorous requirement for 100% of the coffee beans used in its blends to be certified, unlike other certifications, which allow for a heavy dilution of uncertified beans.
So just to bring a little bit more context to sustainable coffee certifications, they were originally developed as a market-based conservation strategy. So the idea is that, as Julie mentioned, a lot of these coffees do sometimes have a reduced yield compared to the conventional sun-grown. So the growers are given a premium to compensate for this reduced yield. And this strategy is associated with the neoliberalization of the coffee market. And this really happened when the neoliberalization of the global economy really happened in the 1980s. So prior to this, a lot of the coffee market was actually government regulated. So after that, new strategies were needed in order to manage the conditions on coffee plantations. And the fair trade certification was one of the first ones, and it was utilized to try and improve the economic conditions for growers, as many coffee plantation growers, they all have really small holdings. That's even still common today. And as we know, organic, and in this case, the bird-friendly coffee certifications were more to promote environmental conservation. And certified coffee is the fastest growing sector of the coffee market. And in 2014, it made up 50% of the US market value. So it is a significant player in the coffee market. However, that does not mean that there are not concerns about these certifications. So some folks would say that it doesn't address the system-wide problems inherent in these economies. And even though the fair trade certifications were explicitly developed to try and improve the quality of life of growers, many of them actually have significant debts that are associated with trying to meet the measures that they need to meet in order to be certified. And in the case of fair trade also, the premium has not actually risen with inflation. So in some cases, the growers that grow the fair trade coffee are actually making less than those growing conventional coffee, which sort of defeats the purpose of fair trade. Sometimes the premiums aren't actually reaching the growers, and they remain with the certification agencies. And there's also continues to be concerned that these certifications more and more are being co-opted by multinational corporations. So on the right, there's an advertisement that was run in the UK and by McDonald's. And I'm sure you can't read the small print, but it's essentially just stating that all of their coffee is Rainforest Alliance certified, which is the case. And what this creates is that more and more multinational corporations are gaining power in the coffee market, and it's often shortening the supply chains because the multinational corporations will buy direct from the coffee producing companies. And it's been shown that a lot of times these coffee chains are actually more unequal in their distribution value than conventional coffee chains. And there's an example that showed up in one of the papers that I read where Dunkin' Donuts, which is one of these companies that buys direct, they were actually marking up their coffee by 95%. So, and none of that money was really getting back to the growers and was just remaining in the corporation. So how do consumers interact with certifications? So there's a lot of varied literature on coffee certifications and consumers, but I did look at a study by Takahashi et al. In 2018, and they identified a few different barriers that exist between consumers and the purchasing of sustainable coffee. In this case, it was shade grown. And they identified lack of awareness, lack of motivation, and failure to notice the labels with the certifications on them as being barriers. They did find that if consistent information was given to the consumers over long periods of time, that there was likely to be more success in purchasing the shade-grown coffee over the conventional coffee. However, information just presented to a consumer who had no prior knowledge or had not purchased the coffee before was unlikely to do anything. And they also found that visual interest was more focused on the labeling rather than the certification logo. So if there was a picture of a forest to sort of demonstrate shade-grown coffee, that the consumer was more likely to focus on that as opposed to the certification logo associated with this shade-grown coffee. And there were some surveys conducted that showed that in general, fair trade and organic labels are quite easily identified by Canadians, with 48% being somewhat to very familiar with fair trade, and 71% of Canadians surveyed were somewhat to very familiar with organic labels. However, there was a survey conducted amongst bird watchers in the US, which would sort of seem to be one of the more likely niche markets that would be interested in bird-friendly coffee. And only 20% of those people had ever heard of bird-friendly coffee. And of those 20%, less than half actually purchased it. So there's a little bit of a disjunct between the certification and their consumer market.
Thanks, Charity. So yeah, so SEEDS was most interested in coffee at UBC and specifically the barriers that are preventing both the demand and the supply of bird-friendly coffee. So we decided to focus more on the supply side. Um, and UBC's website lists 9 independent coffee brands. There's JJ Bean, Great Dane Coffee, The Boulevard, Starbucks, and Tim Hortons, which are the 2 franchises. And here's a quick map of the 12 total locations. And then a little bit more background information about coffee at UBC. In 2011, all non-franchise coffee sold at UBC switched to fair trade organic, and UBC was actually Canada's first fair trade organic campus. And this decision arose from a partnership of SEEDS and UBC Food Services with a couple other organizations. And UBC Food Services deserves a little bit special mention because of its size. They actually operate 24 locations that sell coffee. So that's almost 3 times as much as all the other independent brands. And one interviewee said that in non-COVID times, they serve 30,000 customers a day, which is just an incredible number. And in 2011, they purchased over 11,000 pounds of coffee annually. So they're a massive purchaser of coffee on UBC's campus. So moving on to our interviews, we conducted 5 semi-structured interviews with representatives from 6 of the 9 coffee brands listed on UBC's website. And we asked questions about coffee sourcing and supply practices, knowledge about bird-friendly coffee, feasibility of introducing new blends, as well as the coffee shop's perception of their own customers. And here's a chart comparing the sizes of some of the coffee operations on UBC's campus. And they vary from the Boulevard, which is an independent coffee shop with only 1 location, to Palette, which supplies coffee to Loaf Cafe and Cafe Moa and has 9 locations across Vancouver, to JJ Bean, which is also a Vancouver-based specialty coffee roaster, but it has 22 locations. And UBC Food Services has 24 locations, so it's still larger than all of the others.
So in order to conduct the analysis on the interview, we utilized InVivo, which is a software program for qualitative analysis. I'm not sure if folks are very familiar with it at all, but I'll give a little bit of a rundown on how it worked. So before starting, we developed a thematic coding structure with nodes and subnodes, and we used sort of the interview questions that were developed to create the coding structure. And then the transcripts from the interviews were imported into InVivo and then gone through, and any text that was associated with a relevant node would be put into that node. So you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, just that would be like alongside the right-hand side of the software program, and it would show you what text was associated with what node, just to give you a little bit of a visual. And then as going through the coding, emergent nodes that might have come up that weren't previously identified in the initial thematic coding structure were identified and then added to the coding tree. And essentially InVivo just allows for thematic qualitative analysis and organization through classification. And there are like other ways that you can utilize InVivo with queries and stuff, but for our purposes, it was essentially just to classify the information so that we had easier access for analysis.
Thanks, Charity. Now I'll be going over the findings of our study. And based on the InVivo analysis, here are the main themes and sub-themes that we use to analyze our interviews. So I'm going to go over some main findings regarding coffee supply and sourcing questions. When we asked our interviewees what were important considerations in terms of selecting coffee to stock, ethical considerations and taste were consistently the most important qualities. Most interviewees stressed the importance of geographic diversity when deciding which blends to supply, because each region grows coffee with different flavor characteristics. Coffee shops on UBC's campus source coffee from countries in Latin America, South America, Africa, and Asia, with each country having its own local challenges that coffee shops consider before sourcing the coffee. So many interviewees described how they employed specialists to choose coffee suppliers based on their coffee shop's unique set of values and branding. For example, one small independent coffee shop has the opportunity to be selective with the beans it purchases. And this independent coffee shop relies on certification as more of a complement to its own ethical standards. And many other interviewees noted the same observation as other coffee shops mostly sourced from ethically fair trade and organically certified beans. So of the 5 interviewees, only 1 had previously heard of the bird-friendly certification. And according to that specific interviewee, UBC's Biodiversity Research Center requested bird-friendly coffee as a wholesale purchaser. So that interviewee then began sourcing 1 blend of bird-friendly coffee to sell to the Biodiversity Research Center. And now they sell it in their coffee shop to other customers. So to our knowledge, no other coffee shop sells bird-friendly coffee on UBC's campus. And the one coffee shop on campus that sells bird-friendly coffee has made a conscious decision to not advertise its ethical sourcing and certification practices. Every interviewee viewed certifications as only one component of a larger set of business values and branding. And since all non-franchise coffee shops on UBC's campus are required to serve fair trade and organic certified coffee, as mentioned by Colton earlier, interviewees referred to those certifications as the baseline. One interviewee did not speak too highly about certification, suggesting that they are used by more commodity coffee brands and as a greenwashing marketing strategy. Several interviewees stated their worry that no single certification is complete enough to cover every ethical concern created by the coffee supply chain. And this interviewee suggested that focusing on individual certifications may harm the farmers whose very livelihood depends on coffee. So this interviewee also said that large coffee retailers like Starbucks have a vested interest in the long-term viability of their supply chain. So they voluntarily adopt internal practices related to social, economic, and environmentally sustainable practices. So it's easy for sustainably focused people like us to understand this, but for the layperson, not so much. And focusing so much effort on birds could potentially raise questions about every other type of animal that coffee affects, not to mention the people who grow it. While every other interviewee would at least consider sourcing bird-friendly coffee, this interviewee did not. So here are a few quotes from our interviews that really stuck out to us. I care much more about the people who are picking coffee. When stocking new blends, our biggest concern is how it tastes. Our cafes value sustainability. Fair trade organic is the baseline for us. I think bird-friendly coffee is our best bean. From a supplier perspective, I believe it would be a bit difficult to introduce bird-friendly coffee. So now I'm going to go over some main findings to our questions that asked our interviewees about their customer perceptions. And most interviewees did not want to generalize their customers as they recognize the diversity within their customer demographics. And a lot of coffee shops will leave taste and price were the main drivers for the customers when purchasing coffee on campus. One interviewee stated consistent quality was an important influence followed by price. Another interviewee turned to consumer purchasing data to prove that price and brand was the main driver of coffee sales. And they said that most coffee sold on campus was from the larger coffee franchises that sell inexpensive name brand coffee. Another interviewee believed trends also influence customer choice, especially in terms of taste. So what is currently deemed popular when considering taste, like a specific roast of coffee or certifications, could influence a consumer selection of coffee. And as coffee certifications are not advertised at almost all UBC coffee shops, interviewees did not believe that most customers are influenced or actively seek out certified coffee. And certifications like Rainforest Alliance are an added bonus to certain groups of customers, but several interviewees suggested that most customers are indifferent. So most interviewees said that price was a main driver for the customers. Despite that, the interviewees also acknowledged their price were greater than franchise coffee shops. And the main reason for this difference of price is due to the superior quality of specialty coffee. Additionally, for some smaller coffee shops, interviewees did not believe price was a major contributing factor compared to taste. Owners have noticed that some customers are not aware of the prices of coffee, even when purchasing, and will just freely spend as much as required. Essentially, customers are aware that they are purchasing from specialty coffee stores, and there's an inherent higher price association to that. So customer demographics was a topic that was often brought up when asking interviewees about customer perceptions and preferences. And it is often difficult to gauge customer perceptions as customer values are dependent on their values. And one coffee shop owner recognized the large base of customers and the understanding and knowledge of coffee choices is different amongst these demographics. And here are a few more quotes related to customer perceptions that also stuck out to us. Our main demographic is adequately environmentally conscious, and I think they are interested in new products that reflect these values. We don't get asked a lot about certifications. So now Colton's gonna start us off with some recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Trisa. I apologize if my internet is a little shaky. Hopefully it hangs in there. But so we came up with 6 recommendations specifically for SEEDS. The first of which is to engage and educate the UBC coffee shops. We thought that it was striking that only one of the 5 interviewees had even heard of the bird-friendly certification, because that's what these people do for a living. And you think that they would have researched more coffee brands and been aware of these certifications. But we think that SEEDS really has an opportunity to distribute educational materials about sustainability and bird-friendly coffee, because a lot of these coffee shops claim that they do have strong environmental values. And we think that it could motivate them to actually adopt some bird-friendly coffee blends of their own. And then our second recommendation is for SEEDS to lobby UBC Food Services in particular. And we think that pitching bird-friendly coffee to UBC Food Services could be effective because previous partnerships were effective in bringing fair trade and organic to UBC's campus. And on top of that, UBC Food Services has massive procurement power. So if we do want to make the most impact on UBC's campus, it would make sense to reach out to them first and foremost. And then our third recommendation is to continue customer research. So like Trisa mentioned, interviewees were uncomfortable generalizing about their customers, but most interviewees suggested that a portion of their market would likely be interested in bird-friendly coffee. And we think that there's an opportunity to demonstrate market interest in bird-friendly coffee. And I know that SEEDS had commissioned some other group projects in some undergrad classes to look at this problem from the customer angle. And we think it'd be really interesting to learn about their findings as well. And it's another potential next step for this research. And now Julia is going to conclude with our final 3 recommendations.
So something that we probably should have mentioned earlier is bird-friendly coffee. There's almost no places in Vancouver that you can access it. The only places are Whole Foods, and then we only found out through these interviews that this other small independent shop also has it. But otherwise, there's no other shops that have it. So SEEDS was looking to begin at UBC to kind of start spreading interest and awareness in this coffee, in this certification. But while it's an important hub for sustainability and eco-friendly people, it's not maybe the best place to begin spreading. And the reason why is because all of Vancouver has a strong coffee culture, but UBC is a bit more socially and geographically isolated. So most of the people who come to UBC are students and staff, and it's surrounded by water on 3 sides and a park on the 4th. So even if it were to take root there, it's unlikely that it would spread to the rest of Vancouver without help. So we would recommend that SEEDS also look into forming relationships with other shops around Vancouver. And this map here shows all the independent stores around Vancouver. So there's quite a few of them that they could begin with and begin kind of talking about bird-friendly coffee. Additionally, Vancouver has had a greenest city action plan in the past, and the plans had included different ways to make the city more bird-friendly. So perhaps there's an intersection with the local government to incentivize shops and stores to carry bird-friendly coffee or to raise awareness about it. The next recommendation was from our interviews, we learned about how the coffee supply chain worked and how shops chose their products. Many of the managers were very careful about their selection of brands, both for taste and ethical production. And as a result, they each have an intimate knowledge about the blends that they carry and can be a very important resource for customers. Coffee buyers rely on shops' advice and can be educated about certifications associated with various blends. For many casual coffee drinkers, word of mouth is a driving force in their choice of new blends. Seeds could form partnerships with managers to find different ways to advertise bird-friendly coffee to their customers, whether it be through asking about bird-friendly coffee t-shirts or pamphlets that are provided to customers to pick up and read as they go. And our final recommendation is a bit of an extension of this former point. So we found from our literature review that bird-friendly coffee is not only not widely known or recognized, but even among some of their niche groups like bird watchers, it's not very well known. So a few possible reasons for this is because possibly because of a lack of marketing and a need for a recognizable and pervasive signage. We recommend Seeds engage with the Smithsonian to create or to discuss their marketing and potentially workshop some local level strategies. As bird-friendly coffee certification has changed their seal in three times over 20 years, with the newest one being only 2 years old, it doesn't hold the same recognition of more persistent and pervasive labels like Rainforest Alliance. It will be important to maintain the consistency of this appearance for it to register with customers. One of the key ways would be to make the seal very clear on the coffee it represents. However, we'd also recommend additional marketing strategies to bring bird-friendly coffee to the forefront of coffee buyers' minds, perhaps with the creation of bird-themed coffee sleeves or collectible bird pins for larger purchases. Establishing the brand involves making it both recognizable and its image pervasive so that customers know at a glance the values and ethics of any coffee that bears its seal. So that's the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and let us know if you have any questions.